Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Many people may not realize this, but 95% of people who are out there on the internet using their smartphones and so on can be identified and profiled by just 4 interactions through their mobile device. So if you post a tweet, check your bank account, send an email, check your Facebook newsfeed, boom, some ad network somewhere has profiled you. The problem is that a lot of the companies collecting this data can't live up to their security claims, and this data is vulnerable to hacking. And as security experts will tell you, any device connected to the internet can be hacked. And that's not just your computers or your smartphones or your tablets, but also increasingly our cars that are connected to the internet, your home security systems, your medical devices, power plants, etc., are all vulnerable to hacking. What's more, hacking is not just for criminals. Governments all employ hackers to dig up information on people outside their country and people inside their country. And as we've found from Edward Snowden, the security analyst who has leaked a large trove of documents, our government, the National Security Agency, employs quite a lot of hacking techniques to acquire information, but in a lot of cases they don't even actually have to employ hacking, because if a company is in the jurisdiction of a government and the government has the legal authority to ask for this information, they can just demand it from the company. And so there we are. So I'm Rebecca MacKinnon, as they just said. I'm co-founder of Global Voices Online, an international citizen media network, and also author of Consent of the Network, The Worldwide Struggle for Internet Freedom, and I'll be signing a book after this session is over. And I'm joined here today by 5 brilliant individuals, and all of us are going to be telling you some things that are a little bit scary. But the point is that knowledge is power. And if we want to change the way things are today, if we want to build the world that we want to live in, you have to start by understanding how this digital environment works, what the threats are, who's exercising power. And so with that, I'm going to begin my little story in January 1990, when very few people were using the internet. Was anybody here using the internet in 1990? I wasn't. Okay, so very good. So in 1990, the Berlin Wall came down. And these photographs here on the left and right are the ransacked offices of the Stasi, the secret police in East Germany. And as East Germany began to fall apart, protesters went into these offices and ransacked the files. But 2 years later, the unified democratic Germany declassified all the files, and people could, for the first time, find out who had been spying on them for all of those years. People found out that neighbors, colleagues, sometimes lovers, sometimes spouses, sometimes a parent or a child, had been informing on them to the secret police. It's very traumatic. Fast forward to 2009, the unified democratic Berlin. A German politician named Malte Spitz exercises his right under German law to request data from his mobile phone provider, Deutsche Telekom, on all of his movements over a 6-month period. He takes this, gives it to a newspaper, Die Zeit, and they create an interactive graphic, which you can actually visit still online. And it's got an entire log of all his movements throughout that entire 6-month period. Now, this is, of course, the Stasi's wet dream, right? And it didn't require neighbors and lovers to betray anybody. And this kind of digital dossier is being collected by all of us, by all of our devices and platforms and networks that we're relying on for pretty much everything in our lives these days. And the only difference between a dictatorship and a democracy ultimately in this digital age is going to be, do we have control over how information is collected over us? Are we able to hold the information collectors accountable? Do we understand who's collecting the information, how it's being shared, with whom it's being shared, and how it's being used? And if there's accountability around that, and if this is happening with some consent of the citizenry, then you have a chance of being a democracy. If not, you're going towards dictatorship pretty fast. Now, moving on to San Francisco in 2006, a whistleblower named Mark Klein, who had been a former employee of AT&T, who had been working in that building right there, disclosed that the National Security Agency had built a secret room in that building, and that the communications of millions of ordinary Americans that were routed through that building were being siphoned off into this secret room as they passed through that building. A number of organizations tried to sue the government. Those lawsuits still have yet to go anywhere. But the point being, we started to begin to get a picture of the surveillance that was going on, which of course, how large that picture was and the extent of the surveillance, we're now coming to understand more fully thanks to the leaked information by Edward Snowden. These NSA facilities are everywhere around the country. They're collecting data on a large percentage of Americans. Now, of course, the internet, mobile phones are revolutionary. Let's not deny that. The internet and mobile technology has been used by citizens to overthrow governments, to get opposition leaders elected who would have had no chance otherwise. This technology is very empowering, and it remains so. But at the same time, governments are doing everything they can to use their power over the commercial networks that are within their jurisdictions to fight back. These photos are from the state security headquarters outside of Cairo. In 2011, soon after the Mubarak government fell, some activists got into the headquarters. Some of the agents had tried to shred some documents, left them behind. People were posting this on Twitter, of course. And then, however, there were rooms and rooms of files that were left intact. People got in there. Some people found their own files. What did they find? Reams and reams of email transcripts, cell phone text message transcripts, Skype conversation logs that they thought had been secure, information about data they had been uploading and downloading from the internet, all captured over their internet service providers and mobile phone networks, using technology, incidentally, that the Egyptian government had bought from a company called Naris, owned by Boeing, and whose technology was also used by the NSA in that AT&T facility. We later found out from another leaker. So what's the point here? The point is that increasingly the relationship between citizens and their government is mediated through the internet and related network technologies, which are largely developed, owned, and operated by the private sector. And you cannot assume that the internet is going to evolve in a way that actually empowers the citizen. If we want the internet to evolve in a way that's compatible with democracy, compatible with human rights, compatible with the kind of society we want to live in which individual freedom is protected, we have to fight for it. Just like you have to fight for freedom if you don't engage in the way in which your physical society is being governed, whoever makes the most effort to shape that society will shape it in a way to their greatest advantage. And this is what we need to be working on. Now, as I mentioned, the internet is challenging the sovereignty of nation states in a lot of very important ways, and governments are trying to fight back. But interestingly, this is a map that was developed recently, published recently by the Oxford Internet Institute. And what this is they kind of resized all the countries on the planet based on their internet populations, and then colored each country according to which website is the most visited website in that country. So all of the red those are all countries where Google is the most popular. All of the blue, countries where Facebook is the most popular. China's a big green, because that's Baidu, a Chinese internet company. But what you see here is really interesting, that except for China, Kazakhstan, Russia, Iran, and Korea, all of the other countries, the most dominant web services are American. Now, you combine that information with what we're now learning about the fact that the NSA has relatively unfettered access to information of communications happening on these websites. And while there are arguably some controls over how they can access and what they can do with the information of American citizens and so-called US persons, or those who reside in the United States, there's virtually no meaningful control over what they do and how they collect information of non-US persons. So if you're not a US person and you're looking at this map and you're thinking about this map in the context of what we've learned from Edward Snowden, you might be starting to get pretty mad. And you might be starting to feel that there's a real power imbalance going on here. And in fact, a lot of governments are pretty mad. This is Dilma Rousseff. She's the president of Brazil. She recently spoke to the United Nations and accused the United States of breaching international law for completely failing to respect the privacy of anybody who's not an American on the internet. So why does this matter? If you're an American, why do you care if the privacy rights of non-Americans are being disregarded? Well, it actually relates to the future of the internet. This is something called the International Telecommunications Union. They govern the international telephone and satellite system. Last year, they tried to assert control over how the internet is coordinated and how its standards are developed. It's a UN body, so it was a block of governments, one government, one vote. They came close to doing this, but another block of governments, democracies, working with companies, working with citizens, fought back. Because right now, the way the internet is governed and coordinated is very decentralized. It involves engineers, it involves companies, it involves a lot of non-governmental institutions. And there was an effort to say, governments need to reassert sovereignty over the internet. It was blocked last year, but unfortunately, because of the NSA revelations, a lot of the governments that were actually voting for a more democratic, decentralized internet are starting to rethink. And they're starting to talk about something called data sovereignty, which means that governments are now discussing new laws that would require, if a web service, an internet service, or telecommunications service wants to service the citizens of a particular country, the data needs to be stored and managed in that country. So what does that mean in practice? You know, they're doing this because they don't want the NSA to have such easy access to it. But there's a troubling side of that, which is that there is one country that's already asserting sovereignty over data. It's called China, and this is one of the results. Facebook is blocked in China. This is what you get when you try and visit Facebook on a Chrome browser from inside China. Because Facebook will not house its services that are meant to serve Chinese customers inside China, you can't access it. So this is the kind of world that would become really much more of a facsimile of the international telephone system rather than a free and open borderless internet. And that is because you have a lot of people who feel that their rights are being violated. Now, in my book, Consent of the Networks, I argue that we need to start taking charge. We need to start thinking of ourselves as citizens of the internet, citizens of this network world, and not just passive users. That we need to start telling governments, telling the companies that run our services, that we want our rights to be respected, and also recognize that If only some people's rights are respected and not others, then nobody's rights are ultimately going to be respected, and the whole environment is going to be degraded. And that we really need a movement akin to the environmental movement, which fortunately is starting to emerge. And actually, on October 26th, very soon, there's going to be a march on Washington to demand an end to unaccountable surveillance by the NSA. And people can also begin to join a lot of international movements. There's also Global Voices Online, which I'm part of. But one way that an American can really start to get involved with these issues is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You can go to EFF.org, get a lot of information about what's going on, but also some tips on how to protect yourself, fight for the future, a lot of petition drives, information about rallies you can attend, and a number of other organizations such as Access and Stop Watching Us. So it's up to all of us to determine how our internet evolves. And just as if you want Chicago to be governed in a way that actually respects the rights of its citizens, if the citizens do not get actively involved with that governance, if the citizens have no idea how Chicago is governed, who is exercising power and how, over whom, then you're not going to really be able to affect changes in that governance. You have to participate, you have to be involved, you have to make your views known. As a consumer, we can exercise a lot more power than we're doing right now, not only in terms of what you choose to use and not use, but as a shareholder, and also as a vocal critic. A lot of these companies do respond to public criticism. So let's exercise our power, let's not be passive users, and let's become active citizens of this networked world we're in.